Okay, so this is lesson 3, dealing with governing and who governs in America. So we're still in our introductory unit, and we are dealing with governing and who governs. And this is my second attempt to record this lecture. For some reason, my microphone stopped at 1 minute, and I had recorded the entire lecture previously, and it only got 1 minute of my audio. So I'm going to periodically stop and check that microphone and make sure it is still working. So just sort of bear with me on this. I just want to make sure we get everything we need to get. So back to it here. Our learning objectives are to describe the pluralism-elitism debate, and our departmental learning objectives are to analyze issues and policies in the United States. So our essential questions are: who governs? And describe or analyze the pluralism-elitism debate that is in American society. And so we have a couple of debates within society, or a couple of groups of people who debate within society. I'm just checking that microphone again. We have a couple of sides. First of all, you have the elite theory. And the elite theory of governing, is the fear that a set of elite citizens are really in charge of the government in the United States. And the elite theory is the belief that the wealthy use their power to control the nation's economy, and that the wealthy the wealth that they have allows them to secure important political positions so that they can use that power to control policies and things, and that they use power to make decisions and allocate resources that benefit themselves rather than benefit the common folk. Politicians do the work of wealthy instead of representing ordinary people. So it's a belief that politicians really don't work for the everyday individual, and instead they work for the wealthy individuals. And C. Wright Mills is going to be a foremost supporter of this idea of elitism. And so when we put forth a theory, we have to have evidence to back that up. So what evidence does the elite theory use to sort of suggest that elite people are the ones running society? The first piece of evidence they use is education. And the education argument is that 1/3 of U.S. presidents have attended Ivy League schools, including the most recent 5 former presidents. And so, by and large, regular American people do not go to Ivy League schools. It's a very small percentage of the population who attend Ivy League schools, and so we have a disproportionate amount of presidents who have been in office who have attended these Ivy League schools, representing a vast majority of common people. They also suggest that because 93% of House members and 99% of senators have a bachelor's degree, that these high percentages sort of vault these people into an elite group that have differing values and differing opinions and differing needs of the everyday people. Because if we look at America as a whole, only fewer than 40% of U.S. adults have an associate's degree. And so if people who do not go on to pursue a higher education are going to be represented by a large group of individuals, or excuse me, a smaller group of individuals, is a very high percentage rate of post-secondary education, then there's going to be some kind of a disconnect between what the politicians do in regards to what the public actually needs. And so there are some other things that the elite theory points to in order to try to prove their point, and one of those things is demographics. And the vast majority of national politicians are going to be once involved in state and local politics. They are lawyers or they're business people. And so we have our national politicians who sort of fit into different categories that most Americans do not fit into, because we're not involved in state and local politics. We're not lawyers. We're not business people. Another demographic that they point to is that 80% of the House and the Senate are males, and we know that over half of the population are female, and there are growing populations of different ethnic groups in the United States. And so that plays into this other demographic, that 79% of the House and the Senate are white. And so, if you have white males who are making the laws and making the decisions and policies and things, then perhaps women and some other minority groups are going to be vastly underrepresented by their politicians in office. And so they say that the nation's laws, and this is true, the nation's laws are crafted by well-educated white male professionals and business people. And so they may not really coincide with the needs of everyday Americans. They're not going to align with that, and there's some disjointment that occurs there. Wealth is another another piece of evidence that they use to prove that an elite group runs the government, because more than half of congressmen and women are millionaires, whereas, you know, not very many of us regular people are millionaires. We work regular jobs and don't make millions of dollars every year. Also, the fact that because they are millionaires, 40% of Congress send their kids to private schools. And so they're not getting that public schooling education. They're getting a private school education, which costs money, and most everyday Americans can't really afford that. Only 10% of the public, the regular everyday Americans, send their kids to private schools, and yet it is Congress that makes a lot of laws and policies that deal with a public school education that they do not send their children to. And so it sort of lends credence to this idea that there is an elite group of society versus a regular group within society. And so if we look at the pluralist theory, I'm just checking that microphone again, I don't want that to occur again. The pluralist theory is the idea that the political power rests with competing interest groups who share influence in government. And it's the belief that there are elite members of society, but they do not control the government. That political power is distributed throughout society, and it's distributed by groups. It's not within the hands of the few, it's in the hands of groups of individuals. And these groups of individuals are called interest groups. And interest groups are groups of people with similar opinions regarding what needs to be done for a certain group of people. So as an educator, I might be a part of an educational interest group. Robert Dahl is going to be the foremost supporter of pluralism. And the evidence that is used here is that approximately 70 to 90% of Americans report that they belong to some sort of an interest group, and that politicians are going to seek an electoral payoff. They seek to give their attention to these big groups so that they can have their reelection, get reelected to office, which is one huge motivator of politicians. And pluralists use this idea of electoral payoff and this idea of reelection rates that barely dip below 90% to sort of prove this point. Politicians have to be responsive and attentive to Americans who are making certain demands of government, and if they do not, then they could be tossed out of office. And so they use this electoral payoff example as a way to sort of help prove their point. So this, in a nutshell, is the idea behind a pluralist and the elitist debate within society. And so we're going to stop there for today, and I will see you in our next activity, or our next lecture in lesson 4. All right, thanks a lot.